Good morning and welcome to the March 2023 meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency Board, or the MHRA as we prefer to call ourselves. My name is Stephen Lightfoot, I'm the chair of the board, and my role today is to guide us through today's agenda. Now, for those of you who've not attended one of our board meetings before, I must start by reminding everyone that this is a board meeting held in public and it is not a public meeting. It's also important to explain that the board is responsible for agreeing the strategic direction of the agency, for maintaining high standards of corporate governance, and also scrutinising the performance of the MHRA. But it's equally important to clarify that this board does not make any regulatory decisions on any individual medicines or medical devices. And that's because the regulatory decisions themselves are made on individual products by ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care, on the recommendation of MHRA officials, who themselves are independent civil servants, with the additional independent advice from our expert advisory committees such as the Commission on Human Medicines. Now, as far as today's meeting is concerned, I need to make you all aware that we'll be recording the meeting, so we can publish the video on our website, and also to provide the opportunity for as many people to see the work that we do. Now, on that note, I'm really pleased to say that 113 people have registered to observe our meeting live, with 56 members of the public or representatives of patient groups, 40 people representing industry, 4 journalists, and 13 members of staff. So welcome to each and every one of you, and thank you for joining us this morning. Now, with introductions in mind, I'd just like to go around the virtual and the physical room here today to ask my colleagues on the board to introduce themselves. So, as I said, my name is Stephen Lightfoot and I'm the chair of the board. And so first of all, I'll go onto screen to our chief executive, June Rain. Do you want to say hello, June?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm June Rain. I'm the CEO at MHRA and apologise for not being able to be in the meeting room today. Thank you.
Okay, and Raj, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everyone. Raj Long, non-executive and participating virtually this morning. Thank you.
Okay, and the colleagues in the room today, we'll start with Catherine.
Catherine Glover, Deputy Director, Medicines Regulation and Prescribing at the Department of Health and Social Care.
Good morning, Rose Braithwaite, Chief Finance Officer, MHRA.
Good morning, Glenn Wells, Chief Partnerships Officer at the MHRA.
Good morning, Mercy Jessing, I'm Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Mark Bailey, Chief Science and Innovation Officer at the MHRA.
Morning, Mandy Calvert, Non-Exec Director.
Good morning, Paul Goldsmith, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Bosworth, I'm Director of Communications and Engagement.
Good morning, I'm Natalie Richards, I'm the Head of the Executive Office at the MHRA.
Good morning, Alison Cave, Chief Safety Officer at the MHRA.
Morning, Graham Cook, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Claire Harrison, Chief Digital and Technology Officer.
Good morning, Michael Whitehurst, Non-Executive Director and Chair of the Audit Committee.
Good morning, I'm Laura Squire and I am the Chief Healthcare Quality and Access Officer at the MHRA.
Morning, Haider Hussain, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Carly McGurry, Director of Governance here at MHRA.
Great, thank you, colleagues. And I'd also just like to express a particularly warm welcome to Rose Braithwaite. This is her first meeting as our new Chief Financial Officer, so you're very welcome, Rose, and good luck with your new career. Okay, so colleagues, we should all have access to the board pack of today's papers. And we'll use the page numbers in that board pack to keep us all on track. I will assume that everybody has read the papers so that we can spend most of our time in discussion today. Now, although this is not a public meeting, we will provide an opportunity for members of the public to ask any specific questions about items on the agenda today when we have finished our board discussions. And this can be done using the chat function. Although it's important that members of the public are fully aware that the board cannot see any of the comments that are made on the chat function in this meeting here in the room today, because that's only really used by our communications team to collate the questions themselves. So please don't waste your time making comments in the chat, as the comments won't be seen or responded to, but please be professional and respectful in any questions that you do ask. And finally, if you do want to ask a question that's not related to today's agenda, can I please suggest that you contact our Customer Experience Centre directly instead? So thank you for that. So that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. Can I just check that that's all clear, colleagues, and that we're ready to proceed? Okay, I'm seeing nods around the room, so let us begin. So in terms of apologies for absence, I've received apologies from Dr. Junaid Bajwa, one of our non-executive directors who couldn't be here today. Also from Alison Strath, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer for Scotland, Greg Chalmers, the head of the Chief Medical Officer's Policy Division in Scotland, and also Cathy Harrison, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer for Northern Ireland. So if we could just note those in the minutes, please, that would be great. Natalie, thank you very much. If we just move on to page number 2, we'll see the start of the board declarations of interest. Can I just ask colleagues if there are any new declarations that have not already been declared and are not on this list? I'm not seeing anyone drawing attention to that, so on that basis we can record the declarations as an accurate record. And having reviewed the agenda, I don't believe any further actions are needed to mitigate any of the conflicts that have been declared with the items on this agenda. Can I just check everyone's content with that? Yeah, I'm seeing nods around the table there too. Okay, so if we move on to page number 6 then, please. They're the minutes of the last meeting. First of all, can I just check if they are an accurate record to everybody's memory? I'm seeing, again, nods round the table. So, again, I'd therefore like to move that we approve these minutes as an accurate record of the last meeting. So, I'm seeing consent. So, Natalie, if we can record in the minutes, please, the minutes from the previous meeting were approved. And that leads me on to page number 13 then, which are the actions that directly came out of that and previous meetings. So just moving to page number 13. So item number 29, the items in red here are the ones that are due this month. Mark, could you just give us a brief update on what's happening with the science strategy, please?
Thank you very much, Stephen. The science strategy is being actively written, and a big thank you to a large number of colleagues who have been helping over the past few weeks on the update. We have also been in discussion with external partners looking at the interfaces. We have a draft which I'm hoping that the board will consider in conjunction with the corporate plan, and that we may, at the board's discretion, approach it later on this year as a timing to be agreed.
Okay. Well, let's take that away as a specific action then to just update the board schedule and add the science strategy onto that, please, Natalie. That would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, items number 43 and 51 have been completed. Item number 59 is actually on the agenda, so we'll cover that then, if that's okay. Item number 80. So obviously this was around managing the budget through the year to ensure that the deficit was balanced by the year end. You can see from the performance report that there is a forecast of a surplus, but Rose, can I just ask you just to confirm that you expect the deficit to be managed this year?
Yes, we will be making a surplus this year.
Excellent. So on that basis, I suggest that we close item number 80 then, thank you. Number 86 is also completed. And then number 90. So this came up from a conversation that we had in the January board, just about exploring the feasibility of reprioritising applications based on those companies that have not paid any invoices to the agency. Laura, has there been any progress in considering that?
Yes, we have considered it. I don't know whether it will have a huge impact on the backlog, but it does feel like it's something we should do. We've got about 10% of the late payers account for nearly 70% of the late debt. So right. It's a small number of applications, and of the late payers in that top group, 3 of them are consultancies, so they will be paying on behalf of someone else. Right. So we've looked at it, and I think it will probably take about 40 out of our work queue. So it's a difference, but it's also a principle.
It is an important principle.
So we are looking at issuing letters about some of the other things that we're doing to try to speed through things that are in our work queues at the moment, and that will be on there. But it won't make a massive hit. But as I say, the principle is sound. I think we should do that.
Well, thank you for considering that. If the board is content, I suggest that we close that item because the item was to explore it. Obviously, give appropriate communication with the relevant companies and through your normal processes is what I would expect. But I'll leave that one in your capable hands if that's okay. Okay, so that, and then items 91 and 92 are also marked down as completed. So can I just check the board is content with that? And were there any other matters arising from previous meetings that anybody wanted to raise? Not seeing anyone putting their hand up, so on that basis, we can record the actions as appropriately noted. Okay, that leads us on to the first substantive item, which is on page 16 of the pack. And this is the question to June, the Chief Executive, about what are the most important activities and priorities from the Chief Executive's point of view. So, June, if you'd like to make any introductory comments, we'd very much like to hear them.
Well, thank you. And I think it's clear to the board from what you've read in the report that it has continued to be a tremendously busy time for the agency as we maintain our emphasis on robust science, on being proactive and future focused, and obviously collaboration is a key theme. So perhaps just to bring out one or two key messages. On science, research and innovation, we're looking ahead to the flu vaccines that will be needed for the coming year. And after the WHO decision, we've been working with the WHO laboratory network to provide the reagents for manufacturers to ensure that we do have effective vaccines for the next flu season. Still with vaccines, but cancer vaccines. These have shown very promising signs in initial trials, and the potential is there to on-site manufacture for patients to have the vaccine as quickly as possible if this early promise is realised. So a new approach to regulation may be required, and we're working across the agency on a new pathway. The Innovation Accelerator team is continuing looking at how well we approach horizon scanning. And I think if board agrees, it might be a good topic for a future board meeting. Turning to our focus on access, healthcare access is our key deliverable, and different kinds of products now coming into the frame. Our software and AI team, together with the Clinical Practice Research Data Link, have been working on in silico trial approaches. So a new avenue to support the regulation of these really innovative products with a great potential to improve healthcare. And we, of course, have a multi-agency advisory service, which brings in CQC, the Care Quality Commission, and NICE and the Health Research Authority. But close to home, maintaining supply of medicines is always something we look ahead to do, working with the Department of Health and Social Care. And our teams have been expediting changes to licenses to make sure that supplies are maintained. Of course, as the board knows, patient safety is our top priority, and colleagues will have noted that just last week there was a major review of cough and cold medicines, which contain an ingredient, Volcadine, that's been linked with very rare allergic reactions to an anesthetic relaxant, to a muscle relaxant used in anesthesia, and therefore a very precautionary step was taken right down to wholesalers and pharmacies to remove these medicines. So people can be very confident when they go and purchase a cough and cold medicine. Our dynamic organisation, of course, is very well aware of areas where performance needs to be optimised, and we're working in parallel on transforming services, particularly in these areas. But taking staff into the thinking on all of this, we had an all-staff meeting last month, which was co-designed with our staff partnership group. And that made a very big difference to that feeling of engagement and getting to grips with things as an agency. So, Stephen, I will finish, I think, intensive work ongoing, very attentive to the need to optimise services, but obviously patient safety is our top priority. And all of this depends on the really superb efforts and commitment of our staff.
Yeah, thank you, June. And as always, an excellent report, and it just shows the sheer breadth and depth of the agency and its work. So thank you very much for that, and thank you to all staff that have been involved in all the work that's been mentioned. So, colleagues, obviously, I assume you've read this, but are there any particular questions anyone would like to raise on any of the items that have been raised? Who would like to start? Michael.
June, thank you very much. I'm not a scientist, but I was very fascinated by the work of the Innovation Accelerator. And I just wanted to ask the question, is that now business as usual in the way in which the agency operates, or are we still evolving that as an approach? Because I know members of the public, are very interested in the extent to which we are forward-looking to future challenges that the NHS more widely may face.
Absolutely. I would really want to convey that this is still evolving. The fact that we're looking at these actionable signals rather than simply being abreast and aware of the kinds of developments that are coming. So to highlight what we're calling AHSSs, things that we really need to be ready to do something with, like the cancer vaccines as a good example, but to have that early indication of what may affect patient care, as you say, is so important. So we are looking at how we optimize this and how in science research and innovation, this important function actually plays a role at the very start of our end-to-end pathway. So work in progress, which is why I mentioned earlier that at a suitable moment, it'd be very good to have a board discussion about how we accelerate innovation.
Excellent. Okay, Hader.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, June. Really, really interesting report. This may be slightly too detailed for this forum, and I'm happy to take it offline, but I was really pleased to see the confirmation of the date for the first release, or the beta 1 release for the RMS system, given that's going to be such a core part of our business. I was just wondering, are there any chances to showcase any of the functionality or the system before November, or are there any plans to do that?
Well, Stephen, thank you. Hader, that's a really welcome question, and I'll say something, but I'm sure our Chief Digital and Technology Officer, Claire, would like to jump in. It's really exciting. It's been a major investment. You know that clearly with the optimization of services, our incredible opportunity is to make sure that this is the platform for our future ways of working, not simply state of the art with all that today's opportunities technologically offer to us in the way of self-service, automation, interface, dialogue, rather than slower interactions that have been the behavior in the past. So this is state of the art. The question is, can we start showcasing? Our staff have been very involved actually in look and see, but in order to get the feel of what will be on offer. But maybe Steve and Claire can say a bit more about the board having a chance to roll the sleeves up and look at it.
Yeah, great. Okay, Claire?
Thanks, June. Yeah, I can't say exactly when it will be, but we do regular show and tells anyway. We did a webinar with industry, was it, I think just last week, with 600 plus attendees, and got really good feedback. And it's just one of our principles, the way we work, working in the open and show the thing is a phrase. So the short answer to that, Hader, is yes, but not sure about dates yet. But it's just been designed and built sort of as we speak at pace.
Fabulous. No, that's really great to hear. Maybe we could just see that presentation that went out to industry. That'd be really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
And Laura, this is a key component to actually how your team are going to be working in future. Just as the SRO for the whole project, is there anything you want to add in terms of the way that the project is developing?
No, I mean, just to sort of add a bit of colour to what Claire said about the at the webinar. One of the comments that came back is this is really happening now, isn't it? And that was good to see, because it does feel like that's happening now. We've got subject matter experts and business service owners who are feeding into this. It's quite an intense piece of work and intense demands on the business, but I think it does feel like it's really happening, and the communications are building up now. Yeah. So the webinar was the start of it. We committed to do more, and there is a period before. We're not just going to suddenly flick a switch in November. Yeah. There's a period built in for testing and showing and everything. So we would hope to be able to do that, and we can certainly share what we took to the webinar.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. That's really, really good news. Paul, I think you had a question, and then I'll come to Mandy next.
No, thank you. So question on the Access Consortium that we've now taken the chair of, and the potential for expansion both to other consortia members, but also beyond drugs to devices, new therapies such as cell and gene therapies, and your sort of observations on sort of structure and capabilities of access, which I just don't have a sense for in terms of how one could go about that expansion and the plans for it. June?
Thank you. That's a very timely question during our period in the chair and something we've given a fair bit of thought to. We are mid-flight through a strategy that completes next year on a joint effort by the access countries. And a key point is that Australia, Canada, Singapore, Switzerland, and the UK, while developed regulators, all bring special aspects of the way we do things into the pot. And so expanding the role on new active substances, on new drugs, that's clearly a given. But what we want to do is look at the beginning of the pathway, which is an innovation offer. And we're already discussing how our innovative licensing and access pathway can be fed into a promise pathway for ILAP. And at the far end of the pathway, going into patient care, we're looking to Canada, which is an exemplar of having a proportion of approvals that not only are a regulatory approval of safety, quality, efficacy, but a health technology approval at the same time. So there's much to learn, and how we're trying to bring this together is, with our effort in the chair, to put this on the map more so that industry is aware that access forms effectively a third pillar after the FDA and the EMA. With a market size of around 160 million, we can actually be that really good introductory ground for new products, as well as prompt access and perhaps increasing harmonization for well-established medicines. That's a little bit of a flavour, and if colleagues are particularly interested, I'm sure Glenn, as Chief Partnerships Officer, and the team would be very pleased to share some of the things we're doing, including at a major conference in June.
Okay, thank you, June. Glenn, do you want to add some colour to that?
Not much to add, really, but yeah, very happy for the team and myself to bring something to the board, seminar or public, I don't mind which. I think to Paul's point, how can we expand what goes through access on one hand and expanding the partners is a conversation we've not had with the Access Consortium. But there are various working groups that look at more than just simple medicines going through, and I'm sure we'll work at them in the future. Excuse me. Models support innovation, as June has said. There is a conference in June at the end of our chair period where we'll be updating on those, and we hope to embed some of these things as we go forward.
Yeah, well, it's obviously a very active dialogue going on, so that's what I've detected from that. But Paul, is anything else you want to add?
I mean, it's whether there's sufficient is there a secretariat for access and an executive that is funded by all of the consortia to help drive this forward? It just seems such an important initiative to me.
That's exactly what's on the table just now, and we'll be discussing at the beginning of April with our access colleagues these very fundamental principles to make the consortium reach a new level of expansion and capability.
Yeah, it's how you take what's been an informal arrangement into a formal governance, which is exactly the right thing to be done. So thank you for that. Mandy, I think you had a question.
Thanks, Stephen. My question is around clinical trials. Again, a sort of really important cornerstone of our innovation offer. Where are we up to with the backlog, and how do we know the causes? I'd just like to find a little bit more detail on the actually clearing that backlog of clinical trials and how we're going to put in place processes that are going to make the UK a very attractive place to do clinical trials.
Okay. June, do you want to start and maybe bring Mark in?
Absolutely. Well, it is a top priority. That's the first thing to say. And just by way of assurance, our executive takes stock of the latest information, particularly as the new teams have been put in place every week, as we did yesterday, as you would expect. It is front of mind. It's front of mind because of two things, not just the need to ensure that we are optimally performing, but because we have the opportunity to revise, to reform clinical trials. And so colleagues will be hearing more this week about the change of the legislative framework to simplify, to streamline, to make sure our trial work is interoperable with other jurisdictions, and all of this geared to making sure that we don't acquire what we're about to talk about more, backlogs again. That's really important. And Lord O'Shaughnessy, as colleagues will be aware, has been tasked by government to look very hard into what Mandy will make doing trials in this country commercially really attractive. So all of this thinking is happening, but the focus on the backlogs has been in putting in more staff because there were staff losses. That's the first factor. And that's a natural thing when an organisation has perhaps been in the spotlight and there are opportunities that open up for the leadership, but also to look at how lighter touches can be brought in a risk proportionate manner. So I'll hand over to Mark, and it'd be really useful just to confirm the date on which the backlog will have been eliminated. And I think we're still looking at 4 months, Mark, aren't we?
Okay, Mark?
Yes, on the date, that's correct, June. We're looking at clearance in 4 months. June's highlighted some of the causes there. What I want to emphasise, first of all, is that we are absolutely controlling any risk to the patient. If there's any kind of safety signal, that is treated as the highest priority. We then also prioritise first-in-human studies, where there's the greatest uncertainty of what can actually happen. So that's got to be clear. And after that, we're looking at the particular service areas. We're seeing a lot that can be improved in the processes, and we're making those process improvements now. That will feed into the future legislation and guidance on clinical trials that we're working on.
Okay, Mandy, do you want to come back on that?
Okay, yeah, no, I think it would be good to report back to the board later in the year on that progress, because I think it's fundamental we have that capability going forward.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But I think also, as Mark said, I think there's a clear programme of work, and I know the executive team are absolutely gripping this. So, can I just? Oh, I can see Raj is actually waving at us on the screen. Thank you, Raj. It worked. So, you had a question, then I'll come to Graham next.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question to June. In the context of the access countries, it's great to hear all the scope of what we're trying to do on that front in terms of simplifying and streamlining registration and access. Do we have any plans of opportunities to do the same with clinical trials and the access countries? So, for example, if a company wants to do a development amongst the access countries, is there any opportunity to, take the same approaches essentially, so that you actually have an end-to-end development through to registration and access? Just a thought, because I think there might be an opportunity there of accelerating access for patients overall.
Absolutely. One of our first steps when we became fully part of the Access Consortium in January 2021, we actually instigated a clinical trials group. That has been proceeding, I think, a little bit less promptly than we would like due to some of the staff changes that I've mentioned, but it's very much in sight that we re-energise that work for the reasons you've outlined. The whole idea that we should have master protocols, that we should look together at any blips in a trial that need rapidly sorting out. It's the sort of thing that we bring to the table. So that is going to be a feature of where we're pushing in the overall suite of working groups. As Glenn has said, this is a very important one. I would just like to highlight as well that the timing of all of this, together with Lord O'Shaughnessy's work, is really important, because there's much that we can do by simplifying the law, but actually there's more that we can do with guidance and ways of working. And I think when it comes down to trial representativeness, to patient and public involvement, indeed to looking at priority areas that align with the life sciences mission, like cancer, like heart disease, mental health. These are the things we want to use this opportunity for, but certainly interoperability internationally, something that we learned very well during COVID. We need to build that for the future.
Okay, thank you very much. That's an excellent answer. Graham, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I think we've talked as a board quite a lot about the importance of attractive career pathways at MHRA, so I was really pleased to see that highlighted as an initiative on the top 10 there. I suppose my question really is about the ambition of that. I mean, 8 is a good start, and I just wonder where you want to head with that. And in particular, thinking with my day job hat on, whether there are opportunities to create PhD training schemes for regulatory science, data science, and so forth that exist in NIBS, and where you'd see that going.
Okay, June?
Well, thank you. This headline just really is a signal of our intent. We're really pleased to be launching the graduate scheme, and I think colleagues, particularly Alison, might well want to talk about that. But as you say, there is a broad spectrum of ways in which we can show that a regulatory career in our agency, at any event, is a destination. It's not an opt-out. It's a career, an enhancing role. We want to make sure that the careers are built, and our corporate plan discussion will show all the approaches that we're thinking about. In particular, the question about PhDs. As a trading fund, we were able to support that. And I know that Mark's area does actually find ways to fund PhDs, a vital part of our work. There was one in particular on emerging viral illness. What could be more important? That was in the pre-COVID times. So PhDs and other opportunities to share talent with other arm's length bodies such as the UK Health Security Agency. So Stephen, I know you've been leading work on talent together with our colleagues at the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. There's a number of ways. Let's debate in our corporate plan discussion how we prioritise these, but let's open up the doors for those that want that wonderful combination of cutting edge science, public health relevance, and a feeling that you make a difference.
Excellent. And Alison, is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of what we're actually going to do with these particular graduates?
Yeah, so this is the first scheme, so we're really excited to be launching it. So we start with 8, but year on year, another 8. So we'd end up with a cohort of 24 over a 3-year period. We're building what we think we have a very strong offering at MHRA, and we've already got a large number of applications, and we want more. So that's really exciting to see enthusiasm. We would build rotations across the agency, offer opportunities in each of our 3 main centres, and allow them to choose their direction of travel. So, and also offer a training scheme within that programme. Yeah. So I think it's a really good basis for a science graduate who may not naturally think of MHRA as a place to come in their science career path.
Yeah, with the breadth of the agency, there's a fantastic opportunity here, isn't there?
I would also say secondments is also something that we're looking at, across academia. So there's lots of opportunities, I think.
Yeah. Graham, did you want to come back on that?
No, I think it's very exciting. It'd be great to sort of get an early sort of sense back as to how that's going next year, and understand a bit more about that, I think.
Yeah. And June referenced some work that I'm involved in as well with across the arm's length bodies. Within the Department of Health family as well, because I think there may be opportunities to think about job exchanges, or sort of again secondment type opportunities across the arm's length bodies as well, to give an even broader experience. And so MHRA, I'm sure, would want to be part of that. So we're looking at all opportunities to really build good careers. I think that's a really exciting option. Okay, colleagues, any other thoughts? I just had one question, if I may, and maybe it's a question not so much for you, June, but maybe more for Alison. I was really taken with the comment around the clinical practice research data link being used in supporting the recruitment of a long COVID study. And I just wondered if you could maybe just share a little bit more, Alison, in terms of how that's going and how that's actually helping that particular development.
Yeah, so this was a prospective cohort studies of patients with long COVID, and CPRD supported the recruitment of those patients into the study. Obviously ideal, because primary care database network, that's where those patients sit. It was a challenging study to recruit because obviously long COVID is still a condition where we're struggling to completely define it, the symptoms, the phenotype of that disease. But certainly they developed a symptom burden checker questionnaire through that study, and a number of papers came out of it. So I think it was 250 recruited through CPRD. So definitely it's a good success. I think, and a good demonstrator of the future.
Yeah, and another
Builds
example
the
of how the
plastic
agency is
power.
supporting innovation, to be honest, in a very practical way, in that particular example where we have the data and we can actually clearly share that with developers. So I thought that was really excellent, so thank you for that. Okay, colleagues, if everybody is content, can I suggest that we thank June for her report with great thanks, but more importantly as well, thank all the staff who've actually been doing all the work. So thank you very much to everyone who's been involved in all of the achievements that have been mentioned so far. So, in terms of achievements, that takes us on to performance, which is the next item on the agenda, which is on page number 27. And we have a paper here from Rose on what was the financial and people performance of the MHRA up to the end of January. Rose, you can assume that we've read it, but are there any key points you'd like to bring to the board's attention?
Thank you, Stephen. These management accounts are set up to show the board how we're collecting our income and spending it over the year. This is key now that as an agency, any unspent money, we cannot be carrying it forward to future years. So that's why it's critical to monitor it. The intention at the start of January was to accelerate spend in the final quarter. But I think this becomes slightly unrealistic now in terms of landing on the 3.4 surplus that we're showing in these accounts, because we only have 2 months, well, in reality, 2 weeks left to spend it. So I'm very happy that we're going to land on the numbers for the staff costs, because they are very realistic, and the income as well. But I think the operating costs are going to come down lower than we propose in this forecast. So I believe the surplus is going to be slightly larger than the 3.4 that we are showing. So I'd like to bring that attention to the attention of the board.
Okay. Thank you, Rose. Again, I think the report's very clear, but can I just ask if there are any specific questions anyone would like to ask? Michael?
This is an inevitable question for me. Rose, we've talked about this. Where an organisation underspends for legitimate reasons, we couldn't recruit the staff. That does mean that our original plan of what we intended to deliver moves to the next financial year. So my question is, what assurance can the board take that because we've not spent all the money this year, there's not going to be a major backlog that we've got to address in terms of our plans in the next financial year that we just simply haven't got the money for from a financial annuality perspective?
Okay, Rose?
Thank you, Michael. So in terms of annuality, some of the income will go with the costs in terms of operating costs. So where we're carrying over operational work, the income will go with it. So we will have sufficient money to pay for the extra operational work that we will do next year. The problem is more around the change costs, where we have also underspent this year. However, the budget that we're proposing will allow us to deliver everything that is required that we're wanting to do next financial year. So the fact we've got to a balanced budget, which is in the next paper, does allow us to deliver our plans for next year.
Okay, I welcome that assurance. And Stephen, my final question is, if you look at the detail of this, we are underspending on science, and given that that is a government priority, that is slightly concerning for me. And I just wondered, Mark, I know that it's explained in here the reasons behind it, but it's the assurance that we are going to catch up in this particular space.
Okay. Mark, would you like to come back?
Yes, I mean, I'm very happy to say that our recruitment has been proceeding very well, so the staff numbers continue to increase, and that's a significant part of the underspend in this. We're also looking very closely at our capital spend and our research spend in order to bring that in line, and I am actually convinced that we will meet it next year.
Okay. Yeah. Michael, you got it. Hader.
Thank you, Stephen. 2 questions, please, Rose, and one of them might be a bit too detailed. The first one's around sickness absence. You know, it's worrying to see the levels for anxiety and depression. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that at all, what we're doing about it and how we might be addressing those. And the second question
Let's do one at a time, if that's okay. Yep.
So thank you for that question. Very relevant. We're doing a lot of work to support staff, particularly around their mental well-being. So we do have a new contract that offers very good support for mental well-being, including counselling, and we also have mental first aiders on site as well, should staff wish to make use of them. So we are doing what we can to support staff through the agency.
Just building on that, do we understand the kind of reasons for that? Is there a theme around anxiety and depression?
So the underlying cause, no, we don't have more information on that at the moment, but we are looking at how we can gather better information on it, yes.
Thank you.
This is not unusual in the public sector, and we have the same issues in the NHS, to be fair. But I'm just wondering, just from a leadership point of view, I'm maybe wondering if one of our chief officers would like to comment on what we're doing from a leadership point of view to support staff, because it's not just about providing the services and the counselling services, it's what the leaders do. And maybe Laura, do you want to sort of say what you're doing within your leadership team to support your staff?
Yes, I will, and I'll also say something that we've changed at the executive committee as well, and it sounds like a minor change, but it's quite fundamental, that the format of the papers that come to the executive committee now, they have to have a lot of clarity in them about what the impact on resources is going to be. And that's so important, because we can't, one of the big things that comes up is workload, and we need to really, we get very excited about lots of good new things, and we need to make sure that we're really tough about decisions on resources as well. But I think the other thing that we are all trying to do is just we have a central group that is looking at the response to the staff survey, a lot of which is about well-being, and we are developing local plans as well to try to understand those, because I think so much of this is about local conversations which have to happen at team level and then all the way up. And although things like, I do regular all staff calls, but HQA is 364 people, and nobody really wants to talk in that forum about how they're feeling. So they are not the right forum for that. So smaller meetings in teams really have to be the way forward on this.
Okay, that's helpful context. But Ada, I think you had a second question.
I did, and it was about CPRD. Some of it's answered in the next paper, so we won't go into that. But I was just curious to understand the reasons behind the lower than expected income for CPRD. And what the kind of main drivers around that are.
Thank you. So this is really around some of it is around the capacity of the system, which we are upgrading to enable customers to come on board and access the data. So that's really the main driver of the lower than expected income this year.
Thanks, Rose. And I presume then a lot of the investments that we're making in it will address those.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anything else you want to add to that, Alison?
Yes, I think Rose has pointed out the interventional research arm of CPRD relies on GPs being able to provide that feedback for patients. And obviously we have a primary care network that's under pressure, but also having a really good, slick IT system which enables them to access the data in an easy way is key to that. I think we lost a couple of licenses, but we're looking to build that area next year as well. So confident, and as you'll see in the next paper, there's a good prediction for increased income next year for CPRD.
Good. Okay. Mandy.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, my question was around RMS and the spend on that, in that still looks very optimistic. We had 9 million capital, we've spent 3.8 year to date, but we're only expecting a 1.4 million underspend by year end. Is that realistic, and what's going to be the impact into next year and the year after, both on timescale for delivery, but also potentially inflationary costs?
Okay, I'll maybe come to Rose and maybe ask Claire to add some colour.
Yes, so on RMS, we are expecting to underspend by 1.4 million against that particular project. There are other underspends across the capital portfolio, some of those at South Mims, partly because of the supply chain being problematic. We are mitigating that where we can by bringing supplies on site, even if we can't then fit them. So it's a mixture of underspends in the capital area.
Okay, and Claire, is there anything else you want to add in terms of specifically on RMS spend?
Yeah, I think we'll come to it later on as well in other papers, but just looking really carefully about being lean around delivery but not cutting any corners and prioritising. So that's meant perhaps stopping or pausing or slowing down some other things to ensure RMS is deliverable. And looking at that from a sort of staff perspective, taking people off other projects and putting them on RMS, looking at our supply chain and just everything that we can look at and refine. We have been doing so for RMS.
So your assessment is the underspend is not slowing down the delivery of the new system?
No.
Oh, that's quite important assurance, actually. So thank you for that.
It's really tight, and like I say, it has to be prioritised and difficult decisions made, perhaps around other projects and other work. But it's an agency priority. So I don't want to convey an impression that it's easy. It isn't. But we're working in that way.
No, a project of this scale is never easy, is it? But I think the important thing is you've got a grip. So that's helpful. But does that answer the question, Mandy?
Yes, that's good. I just didn't want to think that we were underspending, but then we would just stack up something for next year.
Yeah.
So thanks, Claire.
Okay, I'll come to Paul next.
Thank you. So it's 2.17, the SRI underspend. The loss of the key contracts on that. And are you able to expand the reasons why and the longer term implications of that?
Rose, should we ask Mark to answer that one?
If you can, that would be very useful. Thank you. He's got more detail than I do.
Certainly. These are just two contracts. They're both reasonably significant contracts. One has been deferred into next financial year, and that reflects the availability of the raw materials. The other one, we've actually gone back into a period of renegotiation, and we're hoping to bring that in time. So it's quite a large figure, but it's actually a small number of things, and both are in hand.
Okay, excellent. Okay, colleagues, Michael, you want to come back?
I just want to say, build on Mandy's point, and I fully take Claire's assurance about RMS, and it was a comment I was going to make under the budget statement, but it may be relevant here. It seems to me, if you look at the budget and the ongoing financial performance of the agency, there are three key components that RMS must deliver in November. One is case management for Laura and others to be able to do their work. The second element is the ability to manage our fee base much better. And the final one is the information that RMS provides around clients and our ability to manage our client base so that we get the money in. Those are three deliverables for me that really are key to this viable product going from November. And the only thing I'd say is, and this is not a reflection on Claire or anybody, my experience more widely of digital projects, when you've got a hard deadline of November, there is a risk that sometimes you begin to compromise, just to say that the machine is up and running, that it's up and running. We mustn't lose sight of those three components, because if we don't, our budget is not going to be delivered. And please, it's not a criticism of the agency. I'm sure everybody recognises that. But I think those three elements need to be very much to the forefront of this board's scrutiny.
Okay. Claire, is there anything else you want to add to that in terms of your assurance?
Yeah, a couple of things. So we have the project board with representatives from each of our areas. And so with decisions such as what should be included in the MVP and what needs to come later and so on, we have really good discussions and agreement on that. And then agree that way forward. Also, we just have to be careful with RMS as well. So to make sure the purpose of the system remains true and retains the integrity. So what I mean by that is we had this discussion actually at the last project board. It's not a reporting system. We want to report on the data. It's not a customer relationship management system, but we need access to client data. So we just have to be careful about scope creep, basically. So make sure those aspects can still be addressed, but RMS might not be the only tool for it. So, for example, we have Power BI and other reporting tools, and one in finance as well that we can use to access that data. So all of that is being addressed, and with the user research that goes on as well, with all the different user groups, finance being one, it's looked at all the time and then just prioritised and delivered in that way.
Yeah, it's a classic example where projects grow and grow and grow, and then you lose sight of what you were trying to achieve in the first place. And
that's why project board's so good.
It's so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Michael?
I'll finish at one point. At the ultimate, and I really take, and I've got tremendous admiration for it, but ultimately what we can't lose sight of is the system needs to make the business more effective. And if it's not doing that, it's not succeeding. And that will be my benchmark in November.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you for that. So, colleagues, are there any other questions around performance? Not seeing them. So, again, can I suggest that we note Rose's report for assurance with thanks? And that'll take us on to the next item, which is the proposed financial budget for the next financial year of 23-24, which is on page number 36. So, Rose, again, you can assume that we've read this, but again, any key points you want to draw to the board's attention?
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, as an agency, we need to balance our planned expenditure each year with our expected income from regulatory, trading activities and funding from the department. If we make a surplus, then the money can't be moved forward into future years. If we overspend, then this directly impacts the department and may lead to qualified accounts. So it's really critical that we have a balanced budget as we are proposing to the board today.
Yep.
The most significant change in our numbers is the increase in fees from the new fee order that will start from the 1st of April. And so that's £10 million of additional income. And we have ensured that the budget has taken lessons learnt from this financial year as well, including a review of our vacancy numbers for our staff costs, which represent around 60% of our costs, and modelling our demand-led income as well based on previous years. And thinking about our capital spend and ensuring that is actually over-programmed to make sure that we make the most of our capital funding. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for that. And I'd also just like to draw the board's attention to figure 1 in particular on page number 38, because I think it really demonstrates the journey that we've been on, because in the year of 21-22, the agency effectively was making a £30 million deficit. So to bring that back to break even in a manageable way, I know it's been painful, but it was really fundamental to the future of this agency. And I think, again, just applaud everybody who's been involved in enabling that to happen, because that is a significant achievement. And I don't want that to go unnoticed. And so therefore, getting to a balanced budget, I think, is really, really critical for us as an agency. I suppose it's also probably important just to understand, Rose, in terms of what the approval process is. So the board, again, today is we're going to seek approval for this budget, but that will then need to go to the Department of Health for appropriate sign-off through ministers.
Correct, yes.
So just so we're all really clear that we still need to go through a step, or Department of Health has been engaged in this, but there's still a sort of a final ministerial sign-off as far as the budgets are concerned. But okay, so that's just the health warning at the beginning. Any specific questions around the content of the proposed budget that anyone would like to raise? Graham?
Yeah, thanks. It was very clear. This is quite a specific thing, but it picks up on a point Michael was making about the spread of spend, and it plays into what we're going to talk about next, I think, around safety. So I just wanted to look at the infrastructure spend for NIBS. Because in figure 4 it's referred to that I think there was probably going to be an appendix which wasn't included, and I don't particularly want to know all the detail. I just wonder how the spend is being prioritised, and in particular, are there safety critical aspects of the infrastructure that are being done early in the year? And is there anything, there seems to be some, you talk about 39% optimism bias, so there's some stuff that probably won't get done, and how are you working out which bits they are?
Thank you, yes. So we are prioritising the health and safety maintenance work, so the steam systems in particular and the fire systems which need routine maintenance. So those get them, we've already let the contracts for both of those, and so they will be done earlier in the year. So spend is definitely focusing on health and safety aspects first, followed by items that will help reduce our costs, so things like the solar panels that will help drive down energy costs and help move us towards carbon neutral position.
So, Graham?
So can I just be clear that there's no aspect of the safety infrastructure that's limited by budget at this point?
No, we are focusing on those aspects first.
Okay. And Mark, do you look like you want to add something to that?
Just to emphasise, this is something we touch on in the health and safety paper that's coming, but there's work happening on some of the biological containment suites, which of course have an indirect effect on health and safety. In that time, we've worked out with the health and safety executive so that the safety is maintained on those work, either by delaying work or by making appropriate measures. So that, yes, safety is an absolute priority at South Mims.
Okay. So I'm hearing there's no limitation of budget for health and safety, Graham. That's what I've just heard. Yeah. Okay. Mercy.
Just looking at the risks to the proposed budget, 3.3. Obviously, as you've said, trading income is demand-led. I just want to know: are you being cautious about setting that? Are we being optimistic? How do we know that even with the increase in fees that we're going to get the kind of the demand that's going to kind of deliver on that?
Okay, Rose?
That's a really good question, thank you. We have been thoughtful by looking at trends through the years and learning some lessons from prior years. So, for instance, our sale of standards did dip this year because we actually based this year's budget on probably the best year we've ever had in terms of demand. So we have been more thoughtful in this budget about setting things at an appropriate level. There is some risk in there, so we've tried to balance the risk. But some of the risk is because we only know for certain around income later in the year. So we will have to monitor very closely how our costs work against our income. But I think it's been done in a relatively conservative way, so that because we are quite risk adverse, I think, in this area, quite rightly, so that we don't impact the department.
Yeah. But also then progressing our backlogs and things like that becomes important because that also helps to drive the income. So, which I think is clearly understood too. So thank you for that. Colleagues, any further questions around the budget? Michael, I think you want to come back in.
No, just a question, or it's an observation. Rose, I can see exactly, and we talked about it, how you've got to the budget. What isn't transparent, though, is the underlying assumption about efficiency within the organisation. And I would assume that given where public money is, that will be something that the Treasury and Department will focus on. So I wondered if you could say something about that. And can I just add to that? I do think it's important that as a board, we monitor what I would call core corporate costs, because they are the basic overhead that, they need to be kept in balance in terms of the frontline delivery. And I don't think we've ever looked at that very clearly, Stephen, in these sorts of papers, which I'm used to in other organisations. But I'd welcome your views on that, Rose.
Okay, Rose?
So in terms of efficiencies, we have built in the efficiencies coming out of the transformation work. So, for example, accommodation costs and some of the digital costs that we've already saved on. So those are built into the budget. In terms of the corporate costs, again, those did reduce as a result of the transformation work in terms of the size and shape of the organisation. But there are obviously cost pressures coming the other way at the same time. So inflation, in particular, on our energy costs, those have gone up by 300k in the last 2 years. So we're pushing it down, and prices are going up at the same time. So it's a balancing act.
I think that's a really important story to tell, but it's not transparent from this paper. And I'm not the department, but that's something that I think you might want to consider in making that a bit more trend. I think we've got a good story to tell, but it is important. And I think also for the public listening that we are really focusing on our frontline delivery to maintain patient safety, innovation, and we're doing that with a really cost-effective back office. I think that could be made more of, Stephen.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that Rose and June and myself are going to a ministerial meeting on Friday to talk about our budget, and I know for certain that efficiencies will be part of that discussion on the basis that you mentioned. I think it's also important we probably need to take more than a one-year view on this, Michael.
Yes, of course you do.
Because I think the investments that we make in digital are one of the ways we can look for efficiencies too, and increasing effectiveness. And so I think actually when we look at a 3-year horizon, I think in potentially the corporate plan, that might be the moment to start thinking about how the efficiencies actually work. Because, obviously, I know in the NHS, those of us involved in NHS organisations will know there's a typical efficiency requirement that's, this year coming is likely to be anywhere between 4 and 8%, which is crazy numbers at one level. But I think the reality is we do need to be thinking about efficiency as part of our discussion and our narrative. But I think some of that's been built in that we can, but I think we'll keep looking for it as well, will be another component. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Colleagues, are we content with the proposed budget? So what we're asking the board to do is to approve this budget for submission to the Department of Health for final approval. That's effectively what our role is today. So I'm seeing nods around the table. So on that basis, if we can just formally record in the minutes that the board approves this budget for further onward submission. Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rose, and also thank you for such a really clear paper. I think the waterfall charts or the bridges, whichever terminology you want to use, I think really helps tell the story, so thank you for that. Okay, that takes us on to the next item, which is onto the governance section. So page number 45. So Michael, what assurance can be provided by the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee? You can assume that we've read the paper, but any key points you'd like to highlight?
Just 2 key points. I won't focus on health and safety because we've got the very good paper from Mark subsequently. Stephen, I mean, you set the challenge this year to have a seamless completion of the accounts audit to a board in July where it all is approved, signed off. So the focus of the last direct was really to stress test as best as we can where we are on the financial statements and to be absolutely confident talking to Rose and external audit that we've got a clear pathway to get to sign off of accounts, I think, on the 11th of July. And what we did, we focused very much on those items on the balance sheet that are more what I would call risky in terms of final audit opinion. And just to give assurance to the board that I think Rose and her team are very much focused on that. There are still things that could come out of the woodwork, but I think everybody's doing the best that they can, including Rose and the corporate governance team, to deliver on that. So that's the first point. The second point I would make was you may be aware that under the standard governance arrangements, every year with the financial statements and the annual report, June as accounting officer has to produce a report that gives assurance to this board and the department and other stakeholders that governance within the organisation is operated as effectively as it can, both looking forward and backward. Now, June gets assurance from the work of the audit committee, all of the other processes and procedures that operate within the organisation. But a key component is internal audit, and internal audit produce on average about 10 reports, 8 to 10 reports a year. So we were concerned that progress in producing the reports had been slow. I think there's a mixture of things here. Partly it is internal audit, partly it is also the department, the agency in terms of its ability to respond to some of these reports. So we did a detailed review of where we are, and what I'm trying to do as chair of the audit committee is over the next couple of months have monthly meetings to check progress. I think it's getting better, but it's going to be tight at the year end. We have had assurances from the head of internal audit that he will have done enough work to give the assurance that June should be looking for, but it's not without risk. And our next committee is on the 21st of April, and I think we will have quite a heavy agenda if all of those internal audit reports are delivered as planned. But grateful to June's and Carly's assurance and Rose that they are very much focused on this, but it is a risk that we do need to manage. I'll take the rest of the report as read, Stephen.
Correct. Okay, thank you for that. Carly, is there anything you want to add to that, just from the executive perspective? And I'll come to Rose next.
Well, thank you to Michael. ARAC is very helpful in terms of managing all of these pressures. I think on internal audit, I would agree that we are making progress in the general sense and how we use that most effectively, target it appropriately on our risks, and ensure that it provides the assurance we need for June to be able to sign those accounts. As Michael's outlined, we are going to have some pressure as we come towards year end, and we also need to look ahead to next year, where we have a similarly ambitious programme reflecting the change that the agency has gone through and continues to work its way through. So there's no illusions, I think, about the amount of work that's involved there.
Okay. And Rose, just from a further assurance from yourself?
Yes, I think I'd agree with all of that, and the work we are doing on the accounts element of the annual report and accounts. We're working closely with the auditors to try and identify any issues that could catch us up and delay us at year end and cause us any issues. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And we've changed the board meeting date to Tuesday, the 11th of July, to allow time for us to be able to get this approved and also then submitted to Parliament. In the appropriate timings. So, okay, so it sounds like the work's going on. There's some risk, is what I've heard, but actually, we're working towards still that particular date, which is excellent. So, colleagues, any specific questions you want to add around or ask Michael about ARAC's report? Okay. June, could I just ask if there's any final comment that you want to make in terms of the assurance from this particular report?
Yes, I'd also like to echo thanks to Michael and colleagues on the ARAC for the work that's being done, and to stress that the executive has raised the priority. We've been interacting very closely with the new head of internal audit and making sure that all support is being given to deliver those last few audit reports to enable assurances by end year. So very much led from the top.
Excellent. Thank you, June. That's helpful context for us. So, okay, on that basis then, I'll ask colleagues if we can note the assurance report with thanks. Yep, okay, so we can note that report. So thank you, Michael, and for all the work that you and the Audit Committee are doing. That takes us on to a really important topic, which is health and safety. And Mark, we've got a couple of reports in here, one providing context for the board, and then, if you like, a formal report on annual health and safety. Again, you can assume we've read the reports, but it would be helpful if you could maybe give some context for the board to take any key points.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the annual report on health and safety is an obligation on the agency to provide an annual report, and we always have done so. It's been a very key year because, of course, with the changes to the organisation, we've been doing an absolutely systematic change to health and safety. And so there's been a lot of work. I've been hugely encouraged by the board's decision to give it such a high profile and to bring it back onto ARAC's agenda so that we have a very high level of scrutiny and assurance. We've also been working extremely closely with the Health and Safety Executive. We've had the report details a number of incidents we've had which have been addressed, or we're completing that. So we've been basically responding very much to their requirements and improving. And that's the message I really want to put forward. Health and safety is one situation of continuous vigilance and continuous improvement. And hopefully the report shows that we are working to do that. I'm particularly encouraged by the response that the staff have made. We now have over 90% of the vigilance roles filled, and these are people who often do it above and beyond their day work, so this should be recognised that they're doing this. We will continue to make improvements. So with that, I'll open up to questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. And we can sort of see the amount of work that's going on in this. And I think it's fair to say that the board training session on health and safety was probably our most energised session that we've had in a long time, I think. So I think in terms of our own responsibilities towards this, I think that was very firmly planted. So, colleagues, any specific questions around Mark's health and safety report? Mandy?
That's very encouraging, the progress of...
Thank
you. Very encouraging, the progress that's been made, I think, and we had a long discussion at Audit Committee. I just wanted to understand a little bit more where we're up to with the SAPO 4 licence as being a key part of our operating. And my other question is, on the annual report, there's quite a lot of focus on South Mims, and I understand that high hazard environment, but in terms of the health and safety of our wider population, if you like, particularly maybe the enforcement teams and those sort of aspects, it didn't seem to have the same level of attention. And I just wanted to make sure that that attention was across all staff who are maybe engaged in activities that have a different level of risk than working in the laboratory. And that I wasn't totally... I need a little bit more reassurance that that is that those processes are in place and we're looking at those risks in the same way.
Okay, Mark?
I absolutely want to assure you that the Inspectorate and the other more diverse roles are being catered for. Yes, this report unfortunately does imply that Tennessee is just being in the office and those roles aren't. We have quite an intensive amount of work done on ensuring their safety when they travel and the like, and it remains a significant priority. We haven't had any incidents in this area, which doesn't mean a thing, actually, because we maintain the kind of constant vigilance on it. But yes, that is absolutely key. Coming to your first question about SAPO 4, the issue there had been having an adequately trained SAPO 4 officer. And we discussed with the Health and Safety Executive and were granted a license to retain the materials as SAPO 4 whilst we're getting that officer. That's vital because these materials include very rare influenza strains, which are part of the pandemic preparedness. And it's a big thank you to the Health and Safety Executive on being understanding. We had identified a candidate as the safety officer. Unfortunately, they dropped out days before starting the role, which set us back. The deputy is recovering from sick leave at the moment, so we have got a very high level priority. In the meantime, SAPO 4 is in a safe state, but we must work fast to get it back online.
Okay, Mandy, does that cover the question?
Yes, I understand the reasons. I think in terms of just understanding the planned date to get this and what is the criticality to the way agencies operating, if those dates slip, if we don't get that officer in place or person doesn't come back. I understand it's a very difficult situation, but I think we need to understand the impact it has on the agency and maybe some times around that.
Okay, Mark?
Well, the in-house training is basically proceeding fast, so we're hoping to actually have that cover in a couple of months. You maybe have to appreciate just how unexpected this situation was. So, but in the meantime, we maintain safety by not having that online and working very hard with partners to make sure that the facility with influenza is delivered in partnership so that there's no risk to the British public.
Yeah, but does that impede any of the other agencies' activities?
It does, but not. It impedes mostly research projects rather than direct safety ones. So we can afford a delay on the research, but we don't want to delay. So it is a highest priority getting this officer in place.
Okay. So I think,
Can I just come in?
Yeah, Mark, Graham, sorry.
I mean, just to pick up on this, because I think obviously H5N1 is a looming threat, and there is a limited amount of national capacity to work with this, and so for pandemic preparedness, the national infrastructure, I think, is critically dependent on this, if I understand it correctly. And I hear what you're saying, and I think actually really grateful for the level of detail in this report. Generally, it was really good. So I don't want to sort of give a false impression of things, but I think it's worth just asking a bit more about not only what the timelines might be, because they're so important, but also where you've got these vulnerable roles. And I have to say, reading the ARAC report, I wasn't hugely reassured by what was discussed there in terms of the roles. Is there something more about training up backups and people who can cross cover and all that sort of building in some redundancy in the staffing so that this doesn't happen again?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we had previously in the old structure was a single biological safety officer. We're now bringing in multiple biological safety officers so that we've got that resilience. Similarly, on the SAPO 4 role, we are training up multiple staff. It is a demanding training, so it doesn't happen overnight at the best of intentions. So, yeah, we want to make sure we are ready for anything such as avian flu developing, and it remains a high priority. I mean, we have a target of approximately 2 months, but it relies on the people passing their training.
Let's say in 2 months that it works and you've got there, would you then feel that you've got a more resilient approach for what happens in the future?
Oh yes, much. I mean, in terms of redundancy of staff. And bear in mind that the plan we're following has been discussed with the Health and Safety Executive. They will ultimately review it again before as part of the licence. So we will make whatever changes we need to hit that level of assurance.
Yeah. And just to be clear, that wasn't redundancy of staff, it's more about resilience.
Sorry, redundancy of skills, so
yes.
there are multiple skills and greater resilience.
I think that's really important, actually. And Graham, just from your experience, is there any advice that you can provide in terms of these sort of high containment facilities and how you make sure you do have sufficient resilient health and safety expertise?
No, I mean, I think it's important to recognise that there aren't many of these. I think, if I'm right in saying there's Porton Down and yourselves, and I'm not sure if anyone else has that capability, so universities aren't able to sustain it. And it's
the Pirbright has some capability in avian influenza.
But I think that, you know, we look to these resources as part of what enables other people to do the work.
So there is a wider potential impact here, I think, so that's why the urgency is so important. I think that's understood. Okay. Paul, I think you had a question.
I was just wondering how the organisational change document, which is to be submitted to HSE in April, links to the agency-wide response to the Gate Zero review?
Good question. They are absolutely integral. So the Health and Safety Executive is looking at clearance of a basic policy aspect of the agency, that we incorporate safety training for, embedded fully within any of these changes. So for the 100 days, it underpins it. So the two are related in terms of the biological safety.
Okay, happy with that? Okay, I had a few very small practical questions, Mark, if that's okay. Just thinking of the report itself. Section 2.1 describes you as the health and safety champion. I think you're slightly underplaying your role there, actually, Mark, because I think actually really I would almost see you as the senior responsible officer or something of that nature, because you're clearly legally accountable for health and safety, certainly on the scientific site. So that was just a drafting point. But I am correct, though, aren't I?
Yes, I am responsible. It's terminology. So the Health and Safety Executive used the phrase Health and Safety Champion. As you're right, I would be the SRO in the civil service terminology.
Yeah. That's helpful to understand that. I think in terms of 2.2, it talks around the health and safety strategy coming to the board. It's not on the board schedule at the moment, but could I maybe suggest that we take an action for it to be put onto the board schedule? Because I think that would be helpful. And then the final point was just on 2.14. There's some very helpful key performance indicators. And I'm just wondering whether we could incorporate those into our quarterly agency performance report, because I don't believe that all of those are currently on that report. Would that seem a sensible approach?
I absolutely agree.
So, Rose, if we could maybe task you with an action to include the health and safety KPIs into the next quarterly performance report, that would be helpful. Okay, that was more of the administrative arrangements. But colleagues, any final comments anyone wants to make? June, could I maybe just come to you and ask you to have the final word on this important topic?
Absolutely, it's vitally important. And while the report has a lot of actions in it, I want the board to be assured that they are well in hand and being driven from the leadership.
Great. Okay, and please get a drink in the interest of your own health and safety. So no, that's great. I appreciate that one very much, June. So on that basis then, I think we can then effectively note the assurance report. And actually in terms of the publication of this annual report, how's that done, Mark?
It usually goes onto the MHRA website, historically in conjunction with the annual report, but we can paste it whenever it's signed off by the board.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that, and I think we value the time that we spent on this particular topic. That being the case, let's move on to the final substantive item, which is everyone's favourite topic of governance. But Carly, you can assume that we've read every single page in minute detail. But are there any key points you'd like to bring to our attention?
I'm so glad to hear that it makes up everybody's favourite subject. So I won't say too much more than that is already set out in the paper. The paper seeks to acknowledge that the agency's governance is perhaps more complex than a typical organisation, and therefore it's really critical to ensure that we have effective governance supported by clear and effective terms of reference. I think particularly in relation to the board and the executive committee, to enable really clear and effective decision making. And that's also true of the assurance committees, where I think we're very much learning as we go and reflecting in schedules how to make those most effective. My sense is that the terms of reference are in a fairly good place to enable all of that. But as someone remarked to me the other day, ensuring that our terms of reference are supporting us to operate as best we can is a bit like painting the Forth Bridge. So the work never really comes to an end, and there's always a need to reflect on the growing nuance and maturity in how we're operating. So the questions for the board really are: is there scope to be even clearer within these documents? Are there any bits that are not working in practice? Are there any conflicts that anyone can spy between those documents? Or is there anywhere that the complexity is not sufficiently unpacked?
Okay, thank you for that. It's probably going to be helpful if we go through this fairly systematically, if that's okay. I think it might just be useful to make sure we've picked up any related points. So let's look at the board terms of reference first, which are on pages 71 to 80. Any particular comments or perspectives on this? This is largely unchanged. There's a few sort of matters of wording to get consistent with other boards, other documents, but to bring it all together. But Paul, I think you wanted to kick us off.
Yeah, I mean, to prove I've read the document in detail. In the board, it says that the board approves partnerships with other organisations, but in Annex A of the exec co-reserved matters, it also says approves partnerships with other organisations. So are they different types of approvals?
Thank you, Paul. I think you've highlighted upon a point that was actually flagged in anticipation of this. So I think there is an action, unless Glenn has any immediate thoughts off the cuff, to just tease out exactly what we mean by that. I think sometimes the terms of reference for the executive committee could perhaps be clearer about the role of approval prior to bringing something to this forum, as opposed to approval in its own right. But I think there's probably also something there about just being clear who has the ultimate decision-making authority in signing on the dotted line, as it were.
Yeah, and just to reassure you, Carly, I did not speak to Paul before we... but Paul found that as I had done. But Glenn, just thinking in terms of how you sort of see the two things, because as I said, the board terms of reference are talking here around approval of substantial... let's get it the right way around. The board ones are saying the approval of formal strategic partnerships, whereas the executive committee terms are approval of partnership agreements. So how would you see this working?
So I didn't see a conflict because I think the board is a place to discuss strategic alignment and collaboration and partnerships with other organisations. And I think the difference for me is when it comes down to what terms you accept, that's an executive function. So I didn't see a conflict at all. I think we can come here and discuss and approve strategic partnerships, and then they are entered into legally by the executive, unless I've got that wrong.
But it's probably something around in the executive committee, then probably something around approval of partnership agreement terms. Yeah, maybe that's the sort of the one additional qualifying word that would just then clarify that. Because I think you're right. I think the executive would need to negotiate the terms of the contract, but the principle of whether we want to work in partnership with another organisation feels like a board decision. So, okay, Paul, does that help?
Yeah, that clarification is useful. And the other area which, at least in the private sector, would normally be at board level would be a REMCOM, and so just sort of clarification really on where that sits for sort of senior pay and rewards Or maybe it's picked up by ODRC.
It's specifically mentioned in the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee. That's what the R is in ODRC, for that very specific reason. So yeah, that's a delegated responsibility to ODRC. Okay. Colleagues, any other thoughts on the board terms of reference? I suppose just on a similar point of trying to be pedantic, perhaps. The first, on the scheme of delegation for the board, it talks about the agency's strategic plan. I'm not sure that we actually have a strategic plan. We do have a corporate plan. We did have a delivery plan in the last 2 years, but, and we also have strategies. Yeah. So can we just be clear what we're expecting the board to approve, and again, obviously then the following on for, what the executive responsibility is in this?
Yes, happy to pick that up and just think about whether we just simply refer there to the corporate plan and then the business plans that support it. We have got business plan further down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take that one away.
I think it's been pedantic, but I think I think the terms of reference should reflect the way we operate today and intending to for the next 3 years. So that would feel appropriate. Okay. So, any further thoughts on the board terms of reference? Okay, I'll move on. We'll do an approval right at the end, but let's look at the executive committee.
Stephen, sorry, I was waving my hand.
Oh, sorry, I missed you there, Raj. Thank you.
Don't worry. Just a clarification. If I looked, Carly, at 12.2 about the chief officers responsible for providing information that needs to be considered by the exec.
Sorry, is this in the board terms of reference?
In the board section. In the board section. 12.2, I think, right? That's still in the board section. Carly, the way it's written, it almost seems it's almost one directional. Is there an opportunity also then for the board collectively, the executive, to bring topics, which I think is the reality of how we work? So it'd be good to, I think, make sure that's also reflected in the wording, because 12.2 looks like it's just a one directional, which I don't think in practice is the case. So just wanted some clarity on that.
So I would certainly agree that that's not the intention, and I don't think it's the case. I think we've moved quite far in terms of developing the board schedule jointly with lots of input. So that's a helpful spot, and I can look at that section again and just tweak the language to reflect that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Okay, so the executive committee terms of reference of the board hasn't got a role in approving these, but I think it's important that we think about the intersection here to ensure that there's commonality. So, any particular thoughts around the executive committee terms of reference? I suppose I was just wondering on one component. Again, it's about being really specific. I see in the executive committee reserved matters that it includes the development of the accommodation strategy. I can't see who approves the accommodation strategy, either the board or the executive committee, or the accounting officer even. So that was just, again, just to be really clear, where does that fit?
So I think that would probably not be dissimilar to the discussion we just had on partnerships in terms of the executive clearly taking responsibility for developing and costing proposals and so on. Clearly there's many facets to our accommodation and location strategy. So that's clearly something that would be a board decision, but then still within the executive responsibility to agree the terms and conditions and so on. So I can spell that out.
And that's why I think actually in the approval of substantial contracts, which is one of the executive committee responsibilities, feels the right thing to do. It's back to the terms type point that Glenn was making. I think once the decision's made, the specific terms of for that particular lease or that particular arrangement need to be executed through the executive committee would feel like the right thing to do. So I felt very comfortable about that. Okay. Any other further thoughts on executive committee? No? Okay. Moving on then to the three board assurance committees. We've got terms of reference for the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee on pages 90 to 95. what we've tried to do with the 3 board assurance committees is to have a more consistent format and some more consistent wording between the 3. The fundamental components don't change very much, but I think the wording changes are there for consistency. But again, really to be clear, there is an assurance committees. They're not management committees. That's very different. So again, Michael, can I just check that you and your committee have reviewed these and that you're content with those? Okay. Can I just check the board is all equally content? Yep. Okay. Similarly, on the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, that's on pages 96 to pages 101. Again, Mercy, can I just check that your committee have reviewed those terms of reference and that you and your colleagues are content with those?
I'm just trying to remember. I'm not sure if we've actually had a meeting to discuss it. I think it has been circulated to them, so it's slightly different from having a conversation about it. But certainly, I think members have seen it, and I'm looking to members to make sure that they have. Yeah.
Okay. So, but you're certainly endorsing them as the chair of the committee. Okay, perfect. And so, colleagues, any particular thoughts or questions on those? No? Okay, that's fine. And then finally, the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee. Mandy, can I just check again that your committees at least had the opportunity to review these terms of reference and you endorse them?
Yes, we have reviewed them. We reviewed them last week, and that'll be. And I think there were some reasonable changes, particularly responding to feedback that people didn't quite understand what the ODRC was doing. And we've also brought one of the chief officers as a substantive member, so that's quite a change. And I think it's fair to say the focus is probably more on the organisational development than remuneration at the moment. And so it's tried to reflect that in the terms of reference, but not just referring to the current programme that we're doing. So it does have some longevity.
You see, and I think in truth that's not unreasonable. One of the reasons that rather than having 4 committees and the remuneration committee probably meeting once per year, it felt more sensible to actually combine the 2, and that was the initial thinking behind why we created Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee. But I think actually focusing on the change, on transformation, on service delivery, and those components feels like it should be the majority of the work of that committee and providing assurance to the board on that basis.
And that's how it's operating.
Okay.
Haida, any thoughts?
No. Everybody content with that? Claire, you look like you want to say something.
Well, just about governance in general, I think. I just don't know how helpful the comment would be. I think we have the governance framework, the different committees and boards and so on to support delivery and decision making and so on. But just always being careful about that balance around keeping it as lean as possible without cutting corners. And I am a champion for governance as well on projects or in organisations where I don't feel there's enough. But I just want to maintain that balance as well. And also I think we need to do, and this is probably more executive committee, some work about bringing that to life a bit more on the ground and the implementation. So Carly will know I've been bothering her these last few weeks where I think a certain part of governance is responsible for certain policies or decisions and so on, but it's been lost in translation somehow. So from a leadership perspective, that's definitely something we need to do. But yeah, just finessing that a little bit more, because there's that grey area between policies that we have and that governance as well, and it blocks or slows down delivery sometimes.
It is about getting the balance right, and I think that's why it will never stay the same. So back to Carly's Forth Road Bridge analogy, I think an annual review of governance is really important to make sure that it is still fit for purpose. But Carly, is there anything else you want to add?
Yes, I mean, I absolutely think that Claire's hit the nail on the head there. I think it's almost the litmus test for effective governance. Is it adding value and not adding layers that are just getting in the way? I think we've come a long way on that, but it's definitely a Forth Bridge. So some of the conversations that we've had just recently have been really helpful in illuminating within the agency where things are not quite lining up correctly. The work that we're doing, which is very complicated around the schedule of delegated authority, will be a big step forward in that, and then should enable more clarity to come. Equally, Rose and I spoke this week, and Rose spotted something of, well, why don't we just turn that on its head and see if that makes us leaner? So it's definitely a principle kind of that in the core of how Governance Office works. Equally, when you're painting the Forth Road Bridge, it can be quite difficult to see the whole picture. So input from colleagues in that and helping us stay true to that is really, really valuable.
Yeah. Okay, I will come to June in a moment, because obviously as accounting officer she's got a lot of responsibilities in this area personally. But Catherine, could I maybe just bring you into the conversation just to say, from the Department of Health's perspective, do these terms of reference that you've obviously had the opportunity to review, do they look fit for purpose from the department's point of view as well?
Yeah, I didn't have any standout concerns.
Okay, and again, we've made a lot of effort to make sure these are consistent with the framework agreement that is working its way through approval.
Yes, we should. Treasury have been working on it in the background to their budget preparations, and assure me we should hear very soon.
Yeah. So, because it's important that we make sure all these things do link up with our statutory responsibilities and also our responsibilities to ministers too. But June, obviously, I just wanted to just check in with yourself. You're the accounting officer, of the agency, not necessarily from a finance point of view, but as the senior responsible individual. Anything that you would like to add to any of the work that's been done on these terms of reference?
Well, first of all, thank you to all the colleagues, and particularly the assurance committees, for the really important work that's done. As Carly said at the beginning, we are a special organisation. We should be very good at managing risk, and the public can rely on us in that regard. But the counterbalancing aspect is it's a live discussion, and we should always be learning from what works. We do not want to add layers. We want to add value through our governance. So we keep the conversation live, but at all times, we're very alert to the risks that we manage in every sense. So I'm very encouraged by the level of really engagement with the discussion today, and the reliance we can place on everyone round the board table to play their part in ensuring our governance is absolutely as fit as it needs to be.
Great. Okay, thank you for that, June. I appreciate those words. Also, just thinking, the cover paper included some results of the survey done on committee effectiveness, and maybe I'll just ask the three committee chairs: is anything that you having looked at the survey results, the actions that you're going to take individually with your respective committees? And maybe Michael, I can maybe come to you first. What have been the learnings from the last year, and what are you going to do differently in the next year?
Put me on the spot there, Stephen. I'm thinking about that. One of the things that I'm really, really keen on is, and I think we're beginning to do it, but probably subject to Mandy and Mercy's view, the organisation is really good with these committees, but what we're seeing is the systemic issues that we should be able to draw out, so that how well we work together, and I think we could go further in that space. But I'm alert to what Claire was saying, that we do this in a leanest way possible. I expect the other thing that I'm interested in is, and I was just reading something here about engaging with colleagues on the committee about, are we learning enough? And I could probably do more in that space, actually. I sometimes, because I'm an auditor by profession, I default to my old skill base and just think, I know this, but I really ought to probably support some of my colleagues a bit more in that space. So I think that's where I would want to go, but I will obviously give more thought to that as well.
That's great. Okay. Mercy, just thinking from the survey results, what you're thinking of doing differently next year?
Well, I think it's a development of this, and the feedback we've got, which has been my thinking anyway, is that we should be doing more deep dives, and I think that's really useful, because I think that's what you want from an assurance committee, because we can put more time into it, and we really don't have time at the board for that. So that's an assurance to the board. I think there shouldn't be overlap between. We shouldn't be doing the same things as we've done at the assurance committee at the board. So we need to be slicker, I think, in that. So we're kind of managing that. I think the times that we have worked together on particular topics, as Michael said, was really good, and we should use that more effectively, especially looking at culture and transformation and systemic issues, where all three committees or two at a time can work in a way. First of all, it's more efficient for the executives, I think, instead of repeating things at different committees just to present at one committee, but we're obviously looking at it from different perspectives. So I think that's a really good kind of way forward. What else? I mean, there's loads of things. And certainly within my committee, having clearer onward-going work programmes is really key for me. But also, I would like to do much more looking back over the 2 years the committee has kind of been around to look, actually, what impact have we had? What changes have there been? And I'm quite keen on that. To do that, in a much more systematic way. I can, because I've probably been longer on the committee than my other non-exec colleagues, I can see some of those changes, but I want to see the longer-term impact.
Okay, that's helpful. And just to complete the set, Mandy, any learning points for the future from your perspective?
Yeah, well, one of the key pieces of feedback was that we got more fairly successfuls than the other committees. So I think it was looking at our terms of reference, really understanding what ODRC is not a standard committee like an audit committee. So I think what we're finding is it wasn't connecting enough with the chief officers, who probably have the major role in the shift of culture and change of processes in the organisation. So that has been addressed through both our agenda items and who we're bringing to the committee, but also in terms of the standing membership, having a chief officer who's not the chief people officer. I don't mean to say it, but I think it's looking at how we're getting through the organisation. So that has been really important, and also conversations that I've had as chair with the chief officers, in addition to the routine conversations I have with Carly and June, has been quite helpful in trying to help us set the agenda. And I think the other piece is having the board agenda set out on a 12-month schedule is enabling us to, we had a bit of difficulty getting our meetings together in trying to then coordinate that with the board agenda.
Okay. But I think it certainly feels like there are some learning points and improvements we can make. I think back to Claire's point, I think it's really important that we are proportionate. I think actually prioritisation of time, if there's on average a quarterly meeting of an assurance committee, we can't discuss everything. So therefore the selectivity of what is going to add the most value becomes really important there. So, okay. So I think on that basis then, we're asked to approve the board terms of reference. So on page 71, can I ask if the board is content to approve the board terms of reference? Approved. Is the board content to approve the executive committee terms of reference? Or actually it's not approved, to endorse, to be more specific? I'm seeing nods with the corrections that we talked about earlier, Carly. And then the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee terms of reference, approved. Seeing nods. Patient Safety and Engagement Committee terms of reference. I'm seeing nods. And then approved the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee terms of reference. Okay. Could I just ask then, just as a final action, Carly, that you just circulate the final version when you've just modified the wording on partnerships in particular and accommodation, just to make sure those specific items. But I don't think we need to debate that any further.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. That's excellent. So that's brought us to the end of the substantive items on the agenda. And now on to my favourite section, which is always the external perspective and questions that members of the public may have about the items on today's agenda. So, Rachel, as our sort of Director of Communications, can I just check, have we got any questions from the public today?
Yeah, thank you. So we've got 2 pre-submitted questions relating to matters on the agenda and a further question that has come through the chat function that relates directly to the agenda today. So would you like to start with the first one?
Let's start with that.
Okay, so this has been touched on in the Chief Exec's report, but the questioner asked whether the delay in clinical trial authorisation reviews was causing concern to the board, and does the board agree that backlogs in clinical trials approvals is one of the high priority issues relating to the organisation's capabilities?
Well, yes, I think it does concern the board. I think that's the first answer. But Mark, do you want to add some further detail to that?
Yes, certainly. And building on the discussion we had, which June answered earlier on. So, yes, we are very much aware, as June reported, it is a weekly discussion item for the Executive Committee where we have done a lot of work on looking at the solutions. And yes, the board is also being kept aware. It is only some of the customers that have been experiencing the extended response, but we do understand that in clinical trials it's a particular concern. We are treating these as the highest priority and committing to rapidly addressing them. We're making flexible use of our expert staff to address where the high demand is, and we're doing real innovative work to improve our processes throughout this to increase the pace and predictability. In this area, we have established a trusted advisor group with thanks to the help from the ABPI and the BIA in putting forward members, so that we can discuss directly the changes we're making with representatives of the clinical trials applicants community to ensure that the interventions and the changes we make are robust, that we are responding to their needs, and that our delivery meets their expectations. We're taking on recommendations on board. They are asking for an increased number of meetings, and we will turn this work into a long-term response which will fit into our work on the clinical trials legislation and guidance to ensure that the changes we're making now are embedded and continue to deliver. We are also committing to publishing the data that is needed by our customers in order to predict this, because we are absolutely committed to transparency. And I want to repeat a point I made earlier, which is the patient safety is paramount. Where we receive an application where there may be concern of patient risk, we deal with that the highest priority, followed by the first in human studies where there is an unknown level of risk, and we remain committed to keep patients safe.
Great. Thank you, Mark. That's a very comprehensive answer indeed to the first question. I'm pleased to say that we're joined online. I think this must be Mrs. Cheryl Granger, who's not only pre-submitted a question, but has also given her permission to appear online. So, Cheryl, you're very welcome this morning. And I wondered if you'd like to ask the board your question, please.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me along. The question is, why has one of the most important regulatory activities, pharmacovigilance, especially over a period of 2 years of multiple injections given to millions of people, has there been a reduction or curtailment of rapid cycle analysis, ecological analysis, target active monitoring, yellow card monitoring, and then the listings of the freedom of information requests and responses received?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Can I ask our Chief Safety Officer, Alison Cave, to maybe respond to that?
Yeah, and thanks very much, Ms Granger, for your question. I think maybe there's a little bit of background, as Ms Granger notes. At the start of the pandemic, the MHRA implemented a very robust 4-stranded strategy for the monitoring of the COVID-19 vaccines. And as you've noted, that includes enhanced passive surveillance, rapid cycle analysis, an active surveillance approach, and as well as that, the launching of, where we can, formal epidemiological studies. And we also did extensive engagement with academia and the international regulatory network to really source additional data as the deployment of the vaccines rolled out. I think what you're referring to is that after 2 years now of regularly publishing a report which summarises the MHRA's safety assessments on the COVID-19 vaccines used in the UK, in line with the advice of the CHM, and in the light of a very stable vaccine profile, a very stable safety profile of the vaccines, we've now transitioned in the context of that report to a routine safety publication and communication of any safety concerns for a vaccine as required, rather than publishing a regular narrative report. But what I really want to emphasise is that the robust safety monitoring and surveillance of any COVID-19 vaccines that are under deployment will continue. And the full range of the tools that you've outlined is still available to us should we see any change in the safety profile of the vaccines that may concern us. We're also continuing to do a regular publication of any suspected adverse reactions for the COVID-19 vaccines authorised in the UK, and we've recently launched a new interactive analysis print in line with approaches for other medicines. So that gives members of the public and industry and anybody who's interested an ability to look at those reports and tailor them to areas that they may be specifically interested in. Just with regard to your second point, with regard to publishing of freedom of information responses, that is indeed an important part of a commitment, and we do acknowledge there has been a gap in publication, and we're working very hard to catch up that with publishing of responses due to resume this week. And we are currently reviewing our resource requirements in that area to ensure that we do deliver on the commitments there and that the publication is kept up to date over the course of the next years. So thank you very much for your question. I hope that provides your reassurance.
Okay. So can I just check, Cheryl, that provides the information you asked?
Yes, there's just many concerns out there regarding the adverse event reports that we've had so far. So at the moment, there's about 1 in 426 doses that's bringing a serious adverse event. And I'm trying to find out more information about that as to why that's not being investigated a little bit more.
Okay. Well, I think what we shouldn't start doing is actually using this as an opportunity to talk around all the specific details there. But again, just in response to that, Alison, is there anything else that you want to add there?
Just to reassure that every single serious adverse event to a vaccine is interrogated and considered and analysed extremely carefully. And I think that if anybody looks at the narrative report that we've been publishing over the last 2 years, you can see, I hope, the huge attention to detail and careful analysis of every single report that comes through. Is incredibly important that we reassure the public and maintain the trust of the public in our surveillance of these vaccines. And it has been a huge effort over the last 2 years to ensure that we do understand the safety profile of the vaccine and that the benefit risk of those vaccines remains positive.
Okay. Thank you for that, Alison, and thank you for your question this morning. Really appreciate you taking the time to do that. Okay, if we can move on to I think there's a third question, Rachel?
Yes, thank you. So a third question submitted through the chat function during the meeting, and this relates to regulatory procedures. So the questioner said, with Reliance procedures being extended to include USA and Japan, will companies submit through Reliance rather than through the national route? How will the MHRA ensure it's still a leader in regulation?
Okay, well, I think that's an interesting point, but I might ask June to comment in a moment. But Laura, is there anything specifically you'd want to add to that? Maybe it's a little premature to say that the new procedure's in place yet.
No, it isn't. But what I would like to say is that we're not expanding Reliance. So Reliance, and it may sound like semantics, but Reliance, where we effectively copy or follow the decisions of the EMA, was a transition provision when we came out of the EMA, and it comes to the end. It comes to the end at the end of this year. What we are looking at is developing an expanded framework of recognition which includes recognising the work of certain other regulators, and the USA and Japan are examples that are possible examples where it makes sense to do so in our decision making. What I would say is that national applications are going to be a really important part of our offer in the future for both innovative and established medicines. We certainly don't want to become a second launch country where we're just following other people. But if we use recognition in the right way, then that can enable us to target our skilled resources on those national applications and make those services competitive, or more competitive relative to comparable regulators. And if we achieve that, we will maintain and enhance our leadership position.
Yeah, okay, I think that's really helpful context. June, is there anything else that you would like to add to that, just from a Chief Executive's perspective?
Yes, I would. And while endorsing everything Laura's said, the important role that we have as a standalone, as a sovereign regulator, is being able to use all the incredible assets of the science, of the public health, of the NHS, for the UK to be the place to develop innovative products, both medicines and medical devices. And for that reason, the Life Sciences vision puts our innovation pathway really at the centre to enable patients to be the first in the world to receive innovative products. So the two sit side by side, but the commitment as a standalone regulator is to ensure that no patient is ever waiting for the benefits of a new medicine or technology. And I think the work that Laura's doing to ensure mutual recognition can be part of that piece means that our resource, our expertise will be there to focus on innovation.
Excellent. I think that's a really important context. But thank you very much for the question for the person that raised that. But am I right in saying that's the end of the questions then, Rachel? I do know that there were some other questions that were pre-submitted that were not related to today's agenda, so they will receive a written response separately, because we want to use this Q&A session specifically for the items on today's agenda. So that concludes the questions, but also the agenda for today. And I'd just like to thank everybody who's been watching online, and also for the participation of my colleagues here in the room today. I'd also particularly like to thank our staff in the agency who've contributed not only to the production of the papers, supporting the meeting, but also the work that they do day in, day out to keep patients safe. And before we leave, I'd just like to remind everyone of the purpose of the MHRA is clearly to protect and to improve public health. And we've talked about a number of aspects of safety all the way through today's agenda. And we'll continue to do that, as June was saying herself then, by continuing to enable scientific innovation, by accelerating patient access to new products, and of course continuing to strengthen and be vigilant on patient safety at all times. So with that in mind, I'd like to close today's meeting. Thank you for your time and have a good day.